My name is Suresh Sani, and I'm the co-president of Landmark on Main Street. And thank you for coming out this evening for the latest in our Conversations from Main Street series. This event is presented with the League of Women Voters of Port Washington, Manhasset, and will feature a discussion with Albany Legislators Jack Maritns and Gina Sillitti. Before I turn over the mic to Regina Gouvernaire, President of the League, I would like to take a moment to thank the Angela and Scott Jagger Foundation for their generous sponsorship of the series. I was privileged to be sitting next to Angela, literally working right next to me when we were both members of the board, and she inspired me and taught me a lot, so thank you, Angela. We are so grateful for Angela and her continued support. Thank you and enjoy the evening.
Thank you. My name is Regina Gouvernaire. I'm president of the League of Women Voters here in Port Washington, Manhasset. And thank you all for joining us tonight for a conversation with Senator Jack Maritns and Gina Sillitti, Assemblywoman. Thank you also to Landmark for graciously providing us with the Rimsky Theater for this event. And thanks to all of you who have made this event possible. As you know, the League is a nonpartisan organization. We never support or oppose any political candidate or party. We never oppose any political party either. Besides educating voters in forums such as those coming up for special district commissioners in 2 weeks, we work to promote civil discourse and cooperation among people with diverse backgrounds and perspectives. This means that we encourage dialogue regardless of the divide: race, religion, age, gender, politics. As Americans, so much can divide us if we let it. We encourage everyone here tonight to consider how you can lower the temperature of current private and public debate. Please seek ways to reach out to neighbors to help build trust and a stronger community. We become stronger as a community when we all feel safe and heard. Please join the League in this work. Together, we can all make our democracy work better. And remember, the League is not for women only. Now I will turn the stage over to Michelle Lamberti, who will facilitate the conversation for this evening. And thank you.
Good evening, everyone. So thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. We're particularly happy and blessed to have both our senator, state senator, and our state assemblywoman with us, which is very exciting. And so I'm going to kick it off a little bit. Regina talked a little bit in her opening remarks about civil discourse, and that's very important to the League. And I know that both of you care very much about this community. And so I think it's very important for folks to know, I'd love it if you could talk a little bit about how you've worked together, different pieces of legislation you've worked on together, to help really bring benefits to our community and further develop our community.
Oh, you go first. Please.
Well, first, thank you to the League for this opportunity. I think it's wonderful, certainly, to share a few comments with our great Assemblywoman. I think it all comes down to understanding what our role is in government. We work together on local issues, mostly having to do with communities like Port Washington, where we overlap. Our districts don't overlap exactly, but certainly in the areas where they do, we share local issues. When it comes to talking about those issues that seem to be on front of mind in Albany, some of the legislation that's passed, we often speak about things and how we perceive that legislation to be and how it will impact the local community. So whether it's the idea of municipalization of LIPA for me, and how a municipalized LIPA will impact our local communities, whether it is criminal justice reforms that seem to be the norm in Albany, and certainly there are concerns, certainly on my part, and to a certain extent on Gina as well, on the impacts to our local communities, accountability. We'll have those discussions when it's a specific piece of legislation, when it's broader policy discussions. I think it's important. We tend to agree on a lot. I think there shouldn't be any surprise when it comes to that. I had the opportunity formally to work with another assemblywoman who represented the area, Michelle Schimmel, and we happened to agree on a lot as well. We don't agree on everything, but on those things that are important, core value issues, whether it is things like the environment, the importance of local communities and local voices and local control. When it comes to things like housing and the size of housing and the ability of local communities to make those choices for themselves, I think those are things that we've worked well together on, have great conversations on, and will continue to do so.
So when we were first asked to do this, and we talk about civil discourse, everything that you always see on TV, especially nationally, is so negative. It's everybody's fighting and going against each other. And so they were like, well, Gina and Jack, opposing parties, different sides of the aisle, but let's just have a conversation. Let's just talk to the community. And when it comes to issues regarding Long Island, we're all on the same page, whether you're Democrat or Republican. I think all but one. We're almost all on the same page with literally everything when it comes to housing, when it comes to criminal justice reform, when it comes to quality of life issues, and the latest, issues with the Long Island Railroad. We're out there, we're advocating, and on the same page working for you. So I am so glad that we got this opportunity to do this. And hopefully you get to know a little bit more about us, although I looked in the room and I pretty much know. I tell you guys, it is like looking into the sun. I know a majority of you here, and we're all friends, so this is going to be a really great conversation, and I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you so much, both of you. And so you both raised some really interesting issues that I think you agree on a lot, and they're issues that definitely affect our community here in Port Washington. So the first one I'll ask a little bit about, you both touched on housing. I know there are issues last year around Governor Hochul's proposal around affordable housing and what that should look like. I know, Senator Maritns, you have a really interesting experience in Mineola around affordable housing that I'd love if you could share with us a little bit. And just some of your thoughts in general about affordable housing. How do we make sure that there is more housing stock available for people who work and live in our towns, that it's affordable, for our teachers, our firefighters, and how do we balance those interests maybe with folks who sometimes have a hard time seeing their neighborhoods change or their community look a little different?
I'll go first. There is certainly a housing crisis, not only in New York, but on Long Island. I'm a renter, full disclosure. I've lived in this community for a long time. My husband grew up in Manhasset. We decided to move here, when we started dating, and then we got married. And now, fun fact, I'm pregnant, and we want to. So we do not want to move. We want to stay here forever. I love it here. We love it here. It is really, really hard to stay here, you guys. It is incredibly difficult. That being said, the housing proposal that the governor had put out earlier this year and also last year, it was too much top-down. It was like Albany coming on high saying, this is what I need you to do, this is how you need to do it, and you better do it or else. And that didn't sit well with a lot of people. It didn't sit well with the villages. We have some mayors here. And so it got scrapped. We fought it, the suburban legislators. We kind of all teamed up, not just Long Island, but Rochester, Rockland, Westchester, upstate, because it didn't just affect us, it affected everyone. Yesterday, I was at an event in Westbury where they were celebrating the end of their DRI project. DRI is Downtown Revitalization Initiative money, and they got $10 million years ago from the governor's office to revitalize their downtowns. That includes housing, that included, facade, and it really, Westbury is like transformative. If you haven't been down there recently, it's really incredible. But these are the kind of things that people want. Give us the tools, and we'll put together what works for our community. But we need more housing stock, and but we have to do it the right way that fits in what the community wants. And not for nothing, especially in villages, there's been master plans, there's been conversations. You guys have set this is what we want to see in our communities, and you've kind of made those zoning changes around what you wanted to see. I would like to see more in the greater North Hempstead area, but looking forward, we have to figure out what the community wants and then move from there. And I thought it was, not to bash the governor, but I thought it was kind of a missed opportunity last year when they talked about the apartments, the accessory dwelling units, which not for nothing, majority of Long Island have. I mean, I think every young person has lived in a basement apartment at some point. I certainly have, because that's all you could afford. But when that fell like a ton of bricks, there was an opportunity, and I think a missed one, but we can come back to it again, to reach out to the stakeholders, the mayors, the people who actually really want to solve this problem. How can we make it work for Long Island? How can we make it work for our suburbs, and figure those things out and move from there? And that's what I would like to see happen with the housing.
Ditto. First of all, please join me in congratulating Kevin. Congratulations. Come on, take a wave. I would agree wholeheartedly. My experience has been a little different. I'm actually someone who was accused of being anti-housing and NIMBY, yet when I was mayor of Mineola almost 20 years ago now, I initiated the overlay district that has built, to this point, almost 2,000 apartments in downtown Mineola around the train station. Now, that's a choice that we made as a village. We brought in the stakeholders, and it was a decision that was made really from the ground up. The community decided in our downtown that that's what we wanted for any number of reasons. It had to do with our downtown, it had to do with the train station, it had to do with, at the time, Winthrop University Hospital, the lack of really feet on the ground in the downtown, and what we needed to do in order to spur retail activity right in our downtown, and it's worked. So we've preserved in the village of Mineola the single-family quality of life, while at the same time dedicating a portion of the village to larger buildings. Things that are unheard of, frankly. I know that in many communities, the idea of building a 3-story building or a 4-story building is very significant. In Mineola, they just approved 2 9-story buildings 2 weeks ago for almost 500 apartment units. It made sense for them. That's what they want to do. It doesn't mean it makes sense in Port Washington. It doesn't mean it makes sense in Manhasset. It doesn't mean it makes sense in other places. So the idea of Albany artificially setting a one-size-fits-all approach to housing just doesn't make sense. We all understand that there are places where it's going to work and there are places where it's not going to work. So it starts with discussing, having that conversation with the community. Look, most of our housing and most of our zoning was built right after World War II. As this became the first suburb in the country, we've developed housing to transition from an agrarian community to a suburban community. For many of our communities, no one has looked at that code in 60, 70, sometimes 80 years. So it is good. For us, it was very good. For Pete Cavallaro and the community in Westbury, it was very good to go back and take a look at the zoning code, not looking back, but looking forward. What kind of a community do we want for ourselves? And I think that's a critical question that every community from time to time should ask. Not that you're going to embrace everything, not that people should, but they should have that question. Are we checking all the boxes today? How can we do things better? How do we use our zoning code as a way of improving certain choices? What we found is that there are a lot of younger people who are living in our local communities who don't have a place to live. They can't find affordable housing. Well, yeah, we have to do something about that. It's not going to fix itself. We also have empty nesters that have decided to downsize but want to continue to live in the communities where they've lived their whole lives. And there should be housing stock for people to not have to make that tough choice to leave the community they've lived in for, in many instances, decades. And so this is something we will tackle together. I agree with Gina. This is something that should be incentivized. We should put resources behind it and put not only money, but also state resources in terms of infrastructure improvements. You're talking about sewers, you're dealing with traffic and parking issues. The kinds of issues that if you're going to do something thoughtfully, you really have to get into the weeds on, but certainly worthwhile. So bottom up, not top down. Just to put it into perspective, slight disagreement. It didn't impact the entire state equally, the governor's proposal. And again, not to bash the governor, but the proposal would have allowed greater density for housing around train stations. And if you look across New York State, the place where there are train stations in suburban communities is right here. Yeah. And so if you take an area like us here in Port Washington, and the proposal was you take a half-mile circle radius around the train station, they would have zoned that area around every train station. Well, we went through the trouble of actually writing or drawing a circle around every train station in Nassau County. And guess what? They overlap. So those circles, a mile wide, centered on train stations, would have allowed 25,000 housing units in each circle. That's what was wrong with it. And so I'm glad she reconsidered it. I understand that there are thoughts about coming back with an alternate proposal. I'm hoping that she discusses it with us before she proposes it, and we'll certainly be part of that discussion. But certainly, first and foremost, protecting local communities and the local prerogative of every community to make that decision for themselves.
And if I could jump in, I'm so glad that you mentioned infrastructure, because one of the things that when the original proposal came out, we sort of like counter-proposed with incentive-based money, and it was to do studies, infrastructure studies, studies to figure out if they could actually do the housing that they wanted to do. I mean, we're America's first suburb, right? And we have America's first suburb problems. Pipes that are sinking and, all kinds of issues with sewer upgrades that we need to do, or areas that don't have sewers at all. My issue, in addition to the density situation, the top-down approach, was just we have existing issues with our infrastructure, with our existing population. And if we don't get that under control, I don't know how we can move forward in some of the things that we want to do. So when we talk about priorities for next year, priorities all along have been trying to get as much money into the district to fix some of this infrastructure stuff. We got money for Manhasset. I'm looking at you, Matt Dono, Manhasset Chamber of Commerce, for Plandome Road, the businesses on Plandome Road. They don't have sewers. Imagine all these businesses, tens of thousands of dollars to pump out, the you-know-what. And all they wanted was sewers, going to save them thousands of dollars. These are the kind of infrastructure projects that we want to do. And then just fixing, again, our existing issues. By the way, Port Washington Water Pollution Control District, they're great. They need a little help. They need a little money to fix some things, but no worries. Everything's working fine over there. But these are some of the priorities and things that we want to bring home next year.
Well, I think the pivot to infrastructure is great. It kind of combines a question I was going to ask just about what our infrastructure needs are, because people, I think, forget about those. So it takes a lot of our resources, but it's so important to our quality of life. And also tying it a little bit to climate preparedness. I mean, for those of us who live in Port, we see Shore Road flood out now. I know some of that is obviously like a town money issue, but thinking through how are we at a statewide level thinking about allocating resources to deal with the climate changes that we know are coming to Long Island, particularly for us here on the North Shore, like the flooding problems, the saltwater intrusion for the water, but just how are we really fiscally planning for that?
Well, I'll start with that. Let's start with water. We are, between Nassau and Suffolk County, 3 million people who live directly above their fresh water source. We have the benefit of a sole source aquifer, but for decades, we have been pumping stuff into the ground. And so we need to redouble our efforts to protect the sole source aquifer, make sure that we're not putting nitrogen and nitrates into the ground, because everything's connected. Groundwater flows. When the nitrogen hits the groundwater, it flows out to the sound here and to the bays. and they happen to suffocate our coastal wetlands. When we lose our coastal wetlands, they are a natural shock absorber to coastal flooding. And so, there are impacts. So if we can put in sewers to prevent stuff from getting put into the ground, which eventually makes its way to the aquifer and then destroys these coastal wetlands, these are things we have to think about because, frankly, folks, they're not making any more water. This is what we have. We're going to drink it. Our kids are going to live here. We live here, and if we care about the community, there was actual discussion earlier this year about the prospect of bringing in water from upstate New York. Now, think about that. New York City gets its water from upstate New York through aqueducts and viaducts and the like, from reservoirs. We don't need to, nor should we, be subject to having water pumped downstate for us. We have plenty of water here if we care for it carefully. Now, over the years, we have placed water wells too close to the shoreline, and so we end up, because of the nature of these wells, obviously they're bringing up water, there's a pump at the bottom, so we have had salt water intrusion into our wells, which have impacted the aquifer. For anyone who doesn't know, the Port Washington Peninsula gets its water from where? Christopher Morley Park. And you're right. You're 1,000% right. But I was talking about because of the wells having been positioned improperly here and overpumped here, they had to move them south to Christopher Morley Park and actually pump that water back up into the peninsula because it is better positioned there than it is here. As was just said, for those who didn't hear, there are different layers of the aquifer. The lowest and purest layer, the reserve for all of Long Island, is the Lloyd.
I think we will get to, I can tell that my audience would like to ask some questions, but we'll finish up here a little bit and then we'll move to some questions.
You're 100% right, and should not be touched. You'll probably get 3 or 4 more tonight. But ladies and gentlemen, if we had to start somewhere, we start with protecting water. We can then talk about the need to upgrade bridges. There's a bridge over the Long Island Railroad, locally that we need to deal with. There are roads and road paving and the ability for us to do that and the infrastructure costs that come from that. It's a big state. We have 18 million people who live here, but of those 18 million, 3 million live between Nassau and Suffolk County. It's important that we get what we all consider to be our fair share. People will differ on what that fair share is. Part of our job is to go up there and convince people who would otherwise like to take those resources and put them in more rural areas or put them in more urban areas and remind them that we have suburban communities that need them as well. So.
Going further with the environment conversation was you guys last year voted, thank you, for the Environmental Bond Act, $4.2 billion, I believe it was, and over time those funds are going to be allocated. One of the biggest issues that I've seen since I've come into office has been the climate change and the storms and the flooding. I live on the north end of town. I live in Manor Haven, and I think it was 3 Fridays ago, there was a terrible rainfall. Shore Road was flooded, and Port Boulevard was flooded. Those are the only 2 ways off of the north end of town. And it's a problem. It's a problem with our drainage capacity and all the different layers of government. A lot of them, it's more local, county and town. The state has, a little tiny part of it. What we need is to find out exactly what needs to be fixed. An assessment of all the sumps, an assessment of all the drainage and the pipes and the outflow. And, they did a bunch of work in Manor Haven, along Manor Haven Boulevard, to help reduce the flooding. But the outflow pipe that goes into Manhasset Bay, that was tens of millions of dollars to upgrade, and it just couldn't be done. So we're still having some flooding issues, not as bad as it was before. But we need these assessment reviews from the town, from the county, and they're, and by the way, good news, are working on it. The town, I believe, earlier this year, has allocated money to get these studies done. And then I learned recently that a legislator in Great Neck, because Great Neck has a whole bunch of issues, has also at the county commissioned a study. But there's pockets in our areas. Herrick's, we also share terrible flooding where like sewage is coming up into people's houses. It's terrible. Those are the kind of things that we want to be able to help. We want to be able to bring funds down from Albany, but we need to know exactly what needs to be done, which is why the Manhasset project was so good, because we knew what we needed to be done. The study had been done, and then we had input from the community and input from the civic associations. Everybody was on the same page of what needed to be done. So between the money from the Environmental Bond Act and hopefully the town and the county putting their funds in, we can kind of tackle this. But some of it's immediate. People are getting their houses flooded every other rainstorm. It's getting worse and worse, and it's immediate. It's an immediate issue that we have to deal with.
If I just
Please,
may,
Jeff.
just to piggyback on that for a sec. Sometimes there's a lack of maintenance when it comes to infrastructure. I'll share a story that, for years we had part of the community that flooded, exactly that, heavy rainfall, that basements would flood. People couldn't understand why this area, in the middle of the community was flooding until we realized that the storm drains for that area tied back to a recharge basin that had not been cleaned out probably in 20 or 30 years. So when the county got there to clear out the recharge basin, they pulled out literally feet of silt that had built up over time. And it's not something that most people will notice because it happens incrementally, but the pipes that were actually the outfall pipes into the recharge basin from that area of town were actually under the silt line. So if the water isn't going anywhere, it's backing up into that community. And so the idea of simple maintenance and making sure that we care for the infrastructure that's in place would also go an awful long way.
The last thing I'll ask, because I can tell my audience would like to ask some questions, is we are at the end of, well, we're getting ready to go into the next session, which is like super exciting. I know people are putting together their legislative priorities. What are both of your priorities for the upcoming session that'll kick off in January? You want to go first, Senator Maritns, or someone?
Sure. A couple of things. I would like to see a refocus on mental health. I have a bill that I've sponsored that has to do with parental oversight of social media sites for minors. I think the studies, the science has been very clear that social media has had a devastating impact on children, mostly on girls, and we're dealing with the consequence of mental health crisis. This bill is modeled on a law that was passed out in Utah. Interesting, and I'm not quite sure why they started in Utah, but it was a national effort, which requires that social media platforms get the consent from parents before a minor can sign up for an account, and that there are controls that are put in place for that minor's account, again, that provides for supervision. I think that's lacking. Someone who can actually keep an eye on things, there are other controls that are there, but if there's one thing that I've seen firsthand, Paula and I are raising our 4 daughters. 2 of them are older, 2 of them are still in their teens, and we've seen the impact of the kind of bullying that takes place online, directly, indirectly, and then if you look at it from further away, you kind of see what's happening across the country, and you see example after example. There are lawsuits that are pending right now in Washington State against these platforms seeking monies to pay for mental health care. So it is not just something that is happening here in New York. It's not just happening in Utah. It's happening around the country, and people are trying to figure out how to place controls on it while at the same time respecting the First Amendment. But we have a balancing act. We're dealing with minors and the ability of minors to be impacted by these things. The other issue I would like to touch on is a little different. For me, it has to do with, here on the island, how we get our energy. For those who may or may not be aware, there's an effort right now to municipalize the Long Island Power Authority, make it into a pure state authority similar to the MTA. And you know, I've got some significant concerns about it. I know I've spoken to Gina about it and others. The issue of who's going to control power on Long Island is important, because for not only for us, but as we move forward, how that decision is made, whether it's based on science and safety or whether it's based on other things, will impact all of our lives. We live on an island that juts out into the middle of the Atlantic, and we're susceptible to hurricanes and nor'easters. Our power lines run through trees, and the idea of converting not only to municipalization, but then to a full electrified energy source and getting away with or away from natural gas should be something that we're all concerned about. Energy and how that energy will impact each and every one of us. I believe in the environment. I believe in protecting the environment. But I also believe that we have to do it incrementally so that we're doing it in a safe way that allows each and every one of us, whether on the coldest day in the winter or the warmest and hottest day in the summer, has access to electricity. And I think that we're pushing too quickly at this point, and we're going to put people at risk. So those are two of the issues that I hope to address in this coming session.
Assemblywoman? Sure. I'm glad you brought up mental health. Just to piggyback on that, I have a bill that I've been working on actually with our Nassau County Police Department folks. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the Joseph P. Dwyer Foundation. It's a peer-to-peer support group for returning veterans. Joe Dwyer actually was from Mount Sinai, where I grew up, and I knew him growing up. He tragically died, mental health issues. But one of the things that our police department would like, and our first responders, is the ability to have these peer-to-peer conversations when they have, when they go through a traumatic event. We want our police force, our first responders, to be in the best mental health shape that they could be in. And this would be a tool for them to have these conversations. Are they already having these conversations? Yes. What does the bill do? It gives it testimonial privilege, so they can feel comfortable knowing that what they say to their peer, who will be trained, of course, that it stays confidential, you know, when appropriate. Another sort of favorite topic of mine, and I think the League of Women Voters may agree, I'm on the Election Law Committee. In my former life, I worked at the Board of Elections, so this is something that is very near and dear to my heart, and I have several election bills that make voting easier, make our rolls more accurate, and give more people the opportunity to vote who are eligible to vote. And then also crack down on people who may or may not say the most accurate things when they're running for office. I don't know who that would be. And so I have a bill currently where basically you have to, it's still, you know, in the works. I'm working on some amendments right now, but you basically have to attest that you are who you say you are, you live where you say you live, and you meet the residency requirements of the office that you seek. So these are, you know, it's really my wheelhouse, the election law stuff, so that's something that I'm working on. And I'm actually working on a couple of bills with our local fire department here in Port Washington. One of the things that our volunteers deal with is early onset Parkinson's from the work that they do. And a couple of years ago, I believe it was, we basically, it was a presumption that if you were a firefighter and you got Parkinson's, it's a presumption that you got it from your firefighting duties. I'm trying to figure out a way that we can extend that to volunteers as well. They did it for the paid firefighters. We're trying to figure out a way to do it for our locals as well. So I've been working with Chris Bollerman at the Port Washington Fire Department on that. So that's something also that's very near and dear to my heart, our volleys. So those are some of the things I'm working on.
Well, thank you both for sharing your priorities with us, or just some of the priorities. So now we're going to invite people to come up to ask questions. I'll do my usual spiel, like civil questions, not statements, please, and one question a person. So we want to make sure that everyone's here gets an opportunity to ask our representatives something that might be on their mind. If someone's already asked your question, I would ask if you could maybe consider letting a neighbor and friend go first who might have a different question. And yeah, so let the questions, when we come up to the mic.
My name's Scott Winter. I live in Beacon Hill, and this is a NIMBY question. And can I have two?
You only get one.
Oh, come
Then
on.
you got to wait and see if anyone else has a question. We'll see.
Your stance on the 145 Shore Road development?
It's big.
Wow. Okay, I didn't need to come down here to hear that.
No, I know. It's
For or against it?
against.
You, sir.
I mean, if you put me on the spot.
Mr. Martins, Senator?
I have no position. It's up to the local community. I
Okay.
think I was clear earlier.
Have
And
either of you
let me,
accepted?
let me just
Senator
finish.
Martin's finished.
Yes.
Because I understand, and I agree with Gina, it is a big project. But I don't think it is my role, nor should it be my role, either to promote it or attack it. But I do appreciate the fact that people are going to ask questions about it, look at the impact of that housing project on the local community, impact on the environment and on the bay, traffic impacts of having that project where it is.
Plus
and
water
frankly,
and sewage.
and all of those things and how it would impact the community. But those are the kinds of questions that need to be answered here, not by people in Albany or people who live, outside of the community. But I do understand concerns about the impact.
As it is right
Address
now,
the
it's
question to
too
both
much.
of you.
Yeah, sure.
Have either of you taken money from Southern Land Company as a campaign contribution?
They have contributed to my campaign.
They have contributed $5,000 to your campaign, is that correct?
But you knew that before you came here.
Absolutely.
Which is like
Never
totally
ask
illegal.
a question you don't know the answer to. I have a lot more questions about 145. I'll let everybody else get their turn.
I think
Your
so.
rules.
Can I just say one thing?
Sure.
We both have staff here. Mario, if you, right behind you, he'll give you my card, and we can follow up anytime and talk more.
Okay.
We said you had a lot
think
of questions.
It's way too big a project for this town. Infrastructure, you all just sit here and blabbed about infrastructure.
Well, I don't
And
think
what
that's
you
a
really-
good representation.
I don't
and
think anybody's
You want to talk
bla-
about water intrusion?
Sure.
We killed Upper Magathie and Lower Magathie 20 years ago. You're in the Lloyd Aquifer that's over by Macy's. You're stealing that water. The only other town in the Long
Okay.
Island that's doing that.
Okay, I think we're going to let somebody else ask. I
No, I'm just
appreciate
saying,
your interest in
it's
like
illegal
environmental
for you to
issues.
be in the Lloyd Aquifer.
I don't think anyone here is doing anything illegal.
Islip Town's in the Lloyd Aquifer, and they're getting sued by the DEC.
And sir,
Well,
so is Long Beach. But let's
Yeah,
understand.
look, we're just
Thank
gonna
you very
let
much
someone-
for your
yeah,
time.
and I will say, I always appreciate everyone's passion about the issues that impact us so importantly right here in our town. And this is a good plug for me too. We have our lovely state elected officials here, but so many of our really important local issues are really based on what happens in our town and our county. So I really encourage folks to come to those meetings, like zoning decisions, not at our state level. Water, I believe also not, because we're so balkanized here in Nassau County.
But let me to that point. There are projects that are going to be regional projects, environmentally regional projects that are going to be important. It can't be funded by, a local village. It's impossible. You can't ask Port North to come up with the infrastructure or the wherewithal and resources to deal with a significant environmental issue, or Baxter Estates. It doesn't work that way, and that's why the state has to provide resources, or the federal government to provide those, because those projects are equally important. No one, I'm more than secure in talking about myself and Gina or anyone else, would advocate for anyone to tap into the Lloyd. Absolutely not. It doesn't need to be. And if people have, they should stop and they should limit their use of that. There are places where they do tap into the Lloyd. Usually it has to do with those communities on the south shore of Long Island, Long Beach, that don't have access to other aquifers because of the configuration of the aquifers, but limited resources, because it is a resource for all of us and for our kids, and it's only to be used at the very last resort. So, next question.
I know we have some other questions. I think, not to put them on the spot, there might be some of our younger audience members who I would encourage to come up. I think it's always great when our young people get involved, so come on up, ladies. You can both come up.
Do we surpass that one question per person?
Yeah, you guys, you're two people, so you get one
kinda get
question
a
each.
two-for- okay.
Girls, don't worry.
I'm Taya Catrones. I'm a high school student. I'm a student advocate for Cura's Champions. And we had a couple questions. And our questions are more surrounding some regarding a state bill. We're trying to pass Cura's law, and it's gone through the judiciary in 2023, and we are wondering how we can really push it through the finish line.
I'll start if that's okay. I feel like Jacqueline Franchetti may have my cell on speed dial. You know, during those last couple of weeks of session, we were texting back and forth. She wanted it to go over the finish line so badly. So Kira's Law, if you guys don't know, Kira Franchetti was murdered by her father in a murder-suicide. There was a custody issue with young Kira, and Jacqueline had feared for her child's safety, feared for her safety, but the judge at the time gave Kira's father visitation without supervision. By the way, jump in, ladies, because you guys are the advocates. Anyways, I'll tell you exactly what happened. He shot her in the back while she slept and burned the house down, and he killed himself in the process. And I'm getting goosebumps talking about it because it's so horrific, and she was so beautiful and full of life. And so her mother, sometimes with these tragedies come the best advocates. I meet these people and I don't ever wish I have ever met them, but I have, because of this horrible thing that happened to them. So Kira's Law is a big bill that has so many different components of it to deal with the different parts of what happened to Kira, dealing with visitation, dealing with the judges and training, and if there is if a parent says that they believe something is happening, there's what do you guys call it? There's somebody that comes in and like a forensic evaluator, yes. Right? That's the word. Yeah. Thank you. I'm trying to remember in the recesses of my brain here, but it's a big bill, and I think that it got paused in the assembly because there were there's so many different agencies that are involved in Kira's Law that they all wanted to see tweaks happen. And I know that the chair of the Judiciary Committee, who's actually the assembly member just to the east of us in Glen Cove, Charles Levine, wants to work with Jacqueline and trying to get it over the finish line. I'm a co-sponsor. I was a very early co-sponsor of Kira's Law, and I want to see it passed, and we need to figure out a way to get it done. Next year, it's going to be a lot of meetings trying to figure out, all these different parts. And Jacqueline is tireless. She comes up to Albany. She has us, she calls us on her cell phones. She not only wants to get, some kind of justice for her daughter, but all the vulnerable children that, don't have a voice and are unfortunately dying or being killed by their parents because of, there's horrible human beings in this world. So did that answer your question? I jumped in on somebody asked me what Kira's Law was, but did that answer?
Yeah, and
Okay.
just to continue building off of that, you both kind of, you expressed your priorities for the upcoming year, and we want to figure out how this can become one of your priorities. You mentioned social media and the mental health of children.
Sure.
We need to give them the chance to grow up. You have 4 daughters. You have a child on the way.
You're absolutely right. And just again to talk a little bit about it, we passed it in the Senate. It was very well received, and for obvious reasons. I think it puts safeguards in place that requires, in a custody battle, that people, and in particular judges, have to be more thoughtful than just to allow visitation for the sake of visitation. And although we want to have, the freedom of a child being able to be visited, but when you have a parent who has some real concerns about the safety of the child and the stability of the other parent, and raises those can't just be ignored for the sake of providing custody. In this case, the father took the child to Virginia, and the murder was done there. That's something that you can't ever take back. So I applaud the family for their efforts, and thank you both for being part of this. I think it gets over the finish line this year. We're almost there. And it is important enough for us to get there. We're halfway home. I think we're much more than halfway home, because I think we're really close. To the Assemblywoman's point, I think Chuck Levine is on board. I think there are some sensitivities about overstepping, stepping on judges' toes, not giving them the kind of discretion that they otherwise would need. But under these circumstances, we're not necessarily substituting something for the judge's discretion. What we're doing is asking the judge to have to consider it formally as a way of addressing it rather than ignoring it and allowing a tragedy to happen. So I do think there's a very good chance, and I'm not going to speak for the Assembly, but I do think there's a very good chance that we'll be able to work to get this done this year.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for
Thank
questioning.
you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, ladies. Keep up your good work.
So, by the way, Kira's champions are, it's a whole bunch of different, you can come up.
Yeah, come up.
Students, and they're trained in advocacy. They've lobbied me, and it's a whole program. It's really fantastic. And you guys have done, huh? Oh, yeah. Oh, right, the walk. There's, so pretty incredible. Hi.
Hi, I'm Leslie Kress. I live in Beacon Hill, right here in Port. One of my questions, I have several, but to do one. We have so many levels of government. We have towns, we have cities, we have mayors, we have town council, we have Nassau County. How can we coordinate on Long Island all the building? For instance, Manor-Haven right now is in the process of building 2 apartment buildings, 30 apartments each, which impacts the rest of Port Washington. Because to get to Manor-Haven, you have to pass through Port Washington. That's another 120 cars in town. Any suggestions?
So one of the things, not to jump in on what some of the mayors do, they meet regularly, just so you know, the peninsula mayors, right? I'm looking at the 2 mayors right there. And they talk about a lot of mutual interests when it comes to, but that comes down to what we talked about before with zoning and individual zoning and, different communities. But you're right, like what happens in Manor-Haven, since we're all the way tucked away on the north end of town. I always say, when you go to Manor-Haven, you really want to go to Manor-Haven, which is nice, why I live there. But it's, it's their zoning, this is what, how they wanted their community to look with, residential units and, additional housing, density housing. I actually don't know how to answer that question. Jack?
Sure. Well, there is a regional approach to this as well. Not only do the local communities have to approve it, but there's a Nassau County Planning Commission that has some oversight over regional planning. So they'll look at the impacts of that project beyond the borders of the immediate community to see what those impacts are. Oftentimes, we're not aware of it, and so perhaps we need to do, or we should talk to our colleagues in government about making that more available for that, so that people have an opportunity to participate, because oftentimes the only people who are there advocating are the local community or the people who are trying to develop the property themselves, losing sight of the fact that the impacts are actually broader than that. So perhaps that's something we can talk to our colleagues at the county level to say, is there a notice requirement to the adjoining communities that allow them the opportunity to know when these hearings are taking place and perhaps participating? Because that's really where the regional discussion takes place. All politics is local. Local community, you want the local community to make those decisions, but to your point, sometimes those impacts are going to overlap, and there should be the opportunity for those communities to be heard as well.
Some other questions. I saw there was a gentleman. I know, it's very hard for us to see from up here. We should say that.
See, I can see that. So I'm going to talk to you, just raise an issue of a mundane issue of taxes.
That's okay. Nothing's
That better? Okay. So what bothers me sometimes about taxes is when the tax policy doesn't meet its original intention, or it's poorly implemented, or it's confusing in the way it's implemented. And the one tax I want to talk to you about is this mansion tax that originally on Long Island, and all in the state, it is a tax that in your lifetime you might encounter one or two times if you happen to sell a house over $1 million. On Long Island, when it was first instituted 34 years ago in 1989, that $1 million house was a mansion. Today, and at that time it affected about 5% of all sales. Today, in Nassau County, that's about 20% of all sales, and in our local region, it's about 60% of all sales. And the tax has not been adjusted since 1989. So there's and it's still a mansion tax, and I don't
I would
think.
love to take this, if that's okay.
So it's something that I think the inequity about that and what it was intended to be is no longer there. It's really a tax that's almost applied to across the board, and over the next 5 years, that 60% that's in our area will become 70% of all sales because as prices increase.
It's, there was a colleague of mine, his name is Nader Sayesh. He actually sponsors a bill that would increase that amount of money to what it should be, I think like $2.5 million.
Yeah.
Because originally, I think, was it 89 or 84? It was in the 80s.
89, and with inflation, it would be about now, with the CPI, it'd be about 2.4 million.
Yeah. And I also tried to get it in the budget, because it is going to be
It's
a
a big-
budgetary hit
Absolutely.
at the end of the day. And what I think it is, I think it's a suburban middle-class tax. And because all houses are $1 million, my husband and I, I mentioned that we rent. We've been looking for a very long time. Now, PS is not the time to look for a house, you guys. Everything, no matter what you look at here in Port Washington, we want to stay here. Everything's over $1 million, and these are not mansions that we're looking at. They're 2, 3-bedroom, 1 and 2 bath houses that are $1 million, $1.1 million, $1.2 million. Matt's nodding his head, he knows. And so it has to be adjusted. We tried so hard. We got it in. The way the budget works, just very, very quickly, is the governor introduces her budget in February, and then the Senate and the Assembly respond with their individual budgets, and then there's kind of a back and forth, and then we put our own budget together, usually by April 1st, but that doesn't happen. So in the Assembly budget this year, that was one of the things that we pushed, and it was in there, but in the end, it didn't make it through. I'm a co-sponsor on that bill. I want to see it happen. I was a co-sponsor before we started looking for a home. But it's important. It's not just important for me. It's important for people who are buying and selling their houses. I'm not a millionaire by any stretch of the imagination. And the people who are selling their homes are certainly not millionaires as well. There are people who've lived in Port Washington 50, 60 years. They bought their house for next to nothing. Original, owners in Soundview and elsewhere. And then they sell their house for over $1 million. And there's this boom, there's this tax, and these families are trying to. And it's a lot of money at the end of the day.
And there's an issue with the way it's applied, because if you sell a house for $999,900,
Right.
$99.
Right, that's the best
You pay zero tax.
Right.
You sell it for $1 more. It's actually the buyer that pays.
Right.
But that $1 more costs $10,000, which I think encourages under-the-table dealings, some other unethical behavior, and it's just, I mean, if you were earning $100 more, if you got a raise and your taxes increased $1,000, you'd think something was wrong. And
Right.
the same thing applies
You-
here.
You're absolutely right, and to Gina's point, it is a suburban tax. It disproportionately impacts us here in Nassau County, and even in Nassau County, it impacts our districts, probably more so than anywhere else here on the North Shore of Nassau County. So yes, we'll continue to work to have it either adjusted for inflation, or frankly,
That's what it should
review it and see what the need is it to begin with, because that revenue comes on the backs of our purchasers, as you know. It's not the person who got the benefit who's leaving, it's the person who's investing and coming into the community that has to pay that. And frankly, it's not fair.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks.
There are other questions. Come up to the microphone. Oh, this gentleman here, because he's a little closer, and then, no, come on up.
Hello,
Hello.
my name is Paul Kurland. And I'm asking this question. I'm a member of the Board of Directors of this theater, and one of the other members who couldn't make it here tonight asked me to ask this question of you, so I'm transmitting the question. There are lots of senior citizens who live in this town and have lived in this town for 40 or 50 or 60 years, and one spouse passes. We have instances where it's just too hard to keep up a one-family house for either one spouse or two spouses. And what can be done so that people like this can continue to live in this community where they want to live, because it's where they lived and where they raised their family and where their friends are, and when they walk into a shop, they're recognized. What can we do about it? This building does something about it. There are lots of senior citizens living upstairs, but we need housing for young people, and we need housing for senior people. And can you tell us what you can do to make that happen?
So we discussed earlier housing and the housing plan and what we call accessory apartments. I think there are communities right here on Long Island who do just that. They have made the decision to allow for accessory apartments under certain conditions because I think people realize, to your point, that there are people who would benefit from having the help to stay in the home that they lived in for decades. There are different approaches to it. The approach we dealt with this year as part of the housing plan was a top-down approach. I would think that that decision has to be made locally. It will either be made by the town or the village to allow for it. I think part of discussions like this are important in terms of bringing it to the fore, but there's never going to be a one-size-fits-all approach to this. There are some communities who simply won't want it. There are others that may embrace it. We need to figure out what's best for each one, and I won't give you an opinion on whether or not it makes sense here in Port Washington, but personally, I agree with you. If you have lived in a house for decades, raised a family in that house, and the children have moved on, and you're there either a couple or you're by yourself, the impact to the local community of adding a couple to help you share those expenses, frankly, should be taken into consideration. That's my opinion, only mine. So I do think there's a path forward. I've seen it done in other communities. I can't tell you whether or not it makes sense here, but I would suggest that perhaps that's part of a dialogue that needs to be had here locally to allow for something to happen, because it frankly is unfair for people to have to make that choice, especially if there aren't housing options or limited housing options for where they can go, having to move to a new community and be uprooted for economics without having a direct impact on the local community.
Yeah, it's a problem. We do, my office does these mobile office hours every year, and out of the people that come, if I had to rank all the issues that people bring to us, housing is number one. AARP was the driver of the ADU conversation, not last year, but the year before. And it, theoretically, it made sense. It was, how do we figure out ways for seniors to stay in their homes? And one of the ideas was to put in or legalize these accessory dwelling units. And again, sometimes they already exist, and just to make them legal and up to code. But again, the problem is, you guys, is that when it's a top-down approach and when Albany tells people this is what you need to do, people just, they feel like their back's against the wall, and they just turn in and they don't want to talk about it any further. And it's been a problem whenever we're dealing with housing, excuse me, whenever we're dealing with housing conversations. And that's why those collaborative conversations are so important when we're talking about housing and when we're talking about how Albany can be helpful. And I think this incentive-based approach is really going to be the only way that it's going to fly. Thank you. I got so much water around me. I got my tissues. The only way that we're going to move forward with these conversations, because it's been so hot. I don't know if there's no other word for it, this conversation about housing. And so this is where we're at, is, it's an incentive-based approach, which may not be the quickest, but I think that's going to be the best way that it's going to fly with our communities to get it done.
Hi, sir.
Hi, my name is Jerry Mintz. I'm the director of the Alternative Education Resource Organization, and we help people find educational alternatives. And we have some good ones on Long Island, like SWS at Wheatley is a very good one, but if you don't happen to have kids 10th to 12th grade and live in the East Williston district, you might not have anything around. And so there are a lot of homeschoolers around, and an increasing number. I think it tripled after the pandemic. And we found that New York State's laws are more restrictive than most states. What do you think about the homeschooling laws in New York State?
If I could be honest with you, I'm not familiar with them. We've probably, when I first came into office, it was right after the pandemic in 2021, I had one group come and talk to me. At the time, they were advocating, I think, for a single bill. But honestly, it's not something that's been approached to me. It's most of the things that have come my way has been dealing with public schools. But I understand the parents need to, especially during the pandemic times, to have the ability to teach their kids the way they want to teach. Oh, I know what it was. It was sports. It had to do with the child's ability to play sports, right? You probably got the same lobby your way.
But to follow up on that, I think our education system here in New York defaults to public education as a matter of course. And that creates some friction, whether it's homeschooling, whether it's religious schools, whether it's charter schools and different school choices. The default from a policy standpoint in New York State is predominantly to public schools, which is, frankly, great if you live in a district that has wonderful school districts and that has, great opportunities like the Port Washington School District, but not every school district is like Port Washington. And when you get to school districts where people want to avail themselves of those choices, things can get a little difficult. So I understand. I'm not quite sure what the particular issue that you're raising in terms of alternatives, but I do know that there is a tremendous amount of pressure, even in the halls of Albany with state education, to default to a public school model, and those other models tend to be more difficult, much more difficult.
It's basically, the laws are not all that supportive of people who want to do that.
Right. Understood.
Way down. I need the bar mitzvah box. My name is Etta Ramsdell. I live in Port Washington. My question is about the 145, the proposed 145 West Shore Road project. Now, I realize that neither one of you has any kind of a vote, either for or against this project. However, if in the event, despite vehement opposition, as you probably know, there were 6,000 signatures opposing the project last year on a petition. If, for some reason, despite this opposition, it is approved by the town of North Hempstead, the developer, Southern Land, will, from my understanding, need a parkland alienation resolution. And that's your wheelhouse. I'd like to know how you feel about it and how you feel about the project in general, recognizing that it's not a Port Washington park, it's a North Hempstead park, about Southern Land wanting to use part of the park as their parking lot. Would you reject a request of that sort?
I can take it first. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that and with the particulars of the project, but if there's going to be the use of a park for private use, our antennas immediately go up in terms of why we're commercializing parkland. So I would have some significant issues with it. We've done parkland alienation bills in the past. Usually that has to do with one park being swapped for another park because it needs to be used for some purpose. Taking a piece of parkland and commercializing it is not something that I would support. I don't think it's anything I've ever supported in the past either.
The town would have to request it too.
The town would have to request the parkland alienation resolution?
Yeah,
or the developer?
No.
Just to be clear, the request would have to come from the park, in this case, owner, in quotes. It would have to be the town of North Hempstead as the owner and the keeper of that parkland that would have to seek or us to introduce bills for parkland alienation.
Correct.
One, I can't see that happening, and certainly I don't see us supporting, I'll speak for myself, but I'm sure I don't see the two of us supporting an alienation of parkland to be commercialized that way.
Well, we got kisses.
Hi, good evening. Good evening. My name is Alice Chong, and I'm a resident here in Port Washington. I have a question related to traffic issues and pedestrian safety. So I almost get run over every day while holding
Are you
my
in Beacon
one-year-old.
Hill?
Yes, I am.
I know you.
And I have to walk down my street to pick up my daughter at the bus stop. And I see so many reckless drivers that just blow through our stop signs because they think that a stop sign is merely a suggestion. And there are many children in my neighborhood that have to cross Beacon Hill Road every day, which is a county road. And the reason why they have to do that is because they don't get an option to take a bus to the middle and high school. And so I have reached out to our Nassau County Legislator, our Nassau County Executive, our Town Council person, our Police Department, since I see dozens of tractor trailers illegally driving on our street every day. And I see drivers that blast through Beacon Hill Road at 40 to 50 miles an hour. And I know that for a fact because there's a digital sign, speed sign. And we have no protection for our children that have to walk. There is no sidewalk option on the north side of Beacon Hill Road. There is no crosswalk. The traffic signals are significantly far apart, as I'm sure you know. And a reckless driver has already claimed the life of a child. And all of these various governmental entities are just passing the buck. Like nobody's claiming responsibility. So my question to both of you, is one, do you support legislation to install stoplight cameras And how can the state provide adequate funding for additional infrastructure to support pedestrians, particularly our children, since our traffic patterns are only increasing on this island? Thank you.
So, stop light cameras.
I mean,
there's
sorry,
also-
stop
Stop
sign
sign cameras. First of all, I do. To your point earlier, stop signs aren't a suggestion. The only thing you're supposed to do at a stop sign is stop. And so if you go through a stop sign, yeah, you should get a ticket. I'd also like to see us refocus resources around, especially around areas that are pedestrians and children going to and from schools. We have deployment of our local police department. Our patrol units should be stationed there. But certainly, I have no issue putting or supporting legislation that would allow for stop sign cameras for those people who would go right through a stop sign. None. You know, I've said this before, and I had a guy come to a forum much like this, was very upset because he had gotten a stop sign ticket in the village locally. And he went through the stop sign. He says, well, I work evenings. I don't know if he was delivering newspapers at night. It was something like that. And he said, you know, there's no one on the road, so it would be hard for me to stop at those stop signs. Exactly. And I said, the one day when there's someone out jogging or there's someone on a bike that you don't expect to be there and you mow them down because you didn't believe in the middle of the night you needed to stop for a stop sign, it's absurd. So, yes.
It's a state.
It would require, good point, any traffic control camera that would allow for the ticketing of somebody, like a red light camera or a stop sign camera, would require state legislation in order to be done.
And it gives the local municipality the ability to do it. Like, we're not saying you have to, but we're changing the law that allows the local municipality to do this if they choose.
Right. And so if the community wants to, if the village board, the town council chooses to, in certain areas because there is a sensitivity to people who are breaking the law, then they would have the ability to do so. But it would not be, you know, a free-for-all. It would be done on a municipality by municipality basis, but it would be and would require state legislation to do that. So thank you.
Thanks. And for my second question, well, it's
Yeah.
a related question, but about funding to support our pedestrians. Have you guys, I was wondering what your stance was on that. You know, given that traffic is only increasing on this island, I was wondering how we can get the appropriate funding, I guess, allotted to us to put in, you know, necessary sidewalks or crosswalks or additional traffic signals, because, you know, frankly, regardless of, I mean, we have many people in our community have reached out to local law enforcement, and they're trying their best, but resources are limited. And so,
Be there 24/7.
right, and right now, you know, there are a lot of pedestrians that take the train home, and it's dark because of daylight savings time, and kids walking home from school, it gets very dangerous, particularly this time of year. And so I was wondering, you know, how, whether or not you support increased funding for additional infrastructure to support pedestrians, given the traffic patterns.
So the short answer is yes, of course. There are projects that we've funded, you know, safe streets programs, but if there was something that, you know, particularly like the town wanted to do or the county wanted to do, or the residents rallied that they wanted to do a specific project, and they said, hey, Gina, hey, Jack, we want to do this, we want to, you know, add a flashing light, we want to put sidewalks, we want to do some kind of, you know, some other kind of mitigation measure, but, you know, we need money for it. You know, this is where we come in, you know, not the cash cows, but like we, you know, we can help fund these local projects. I can't remember where I met you or seen you, but like I think of you when I drive on that road. I'm like, oh God. No, it's people not stopping at stop signs is a pet peeve of mine. My husband knows. To the point where I like flash my lights and beep. Because you never know. You know, and also when you're home in your own neighborhood, you kind of get into that rut of just like autopilot. But I mean, again, I live in Manor. People are constantly walking and riding their bikes. It's a problem. Everybody's in a rush, not paying attention. But I support all these measures, and if there is funding that I can get to get any of these projects done, I will.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Owen.
Hi, Owen.
Hello. And first, congratulations. When the blessed event occurs, your marriage will go to a plateau that isn't describable. I have a related question, follow up to the lady that just spoke.
Sure.
Speed cameras, Southern State Parkway. They're already there with the Homeland Security. Why can't you support legislation to get them to ticket speeders? Take a ride on the Southern State. It's a racetrack. The police can't be everywhere. And further, they really can't pull over cars because they're not supposed to be chasing people anymore. It's too dangerous. Besides that, there's a lot of traffic. Speed cameras work. New York City has them. The United Kingdom has them. Will you push for this legislation that you talked about, the stop signs and the speed cameras? We have to address aggressive driving. Drive on the LIE, 90 miles an hour. People tailgating, get a ticket. I think you'll think twice about it.
Right.
So, in conclusion, not just support, will you push for, move the legislation forward to get these things done? Okay.
You mentioned the Southern State. Is that specific to the Southern State or just generically everywhere?
Well,
And I asked for a reason. I
The
know.
cameras are on the Southern State Parkway.
Right.
Homeland Security. I don't know if they're they're on Northern State, but I know they're on the Southern State. And they can be activated to start issuing speeding tickets.
Okay. No, and the reason I ask is this, and I think we've had this debate in the past. We had a similar debate a few years back when it came to school cameras. Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
And we had people who came out and said, well, you know, these school cameras, they're too sensitive, they're going off. Well, the speed limit in a school zone was 20, and they went off when people hit 30 or 31. So there's a 10-mile-an-hour give. But speed limits to the same extent as stop signs, they're not speed suggestions, they're speed limits. And so if we're going to have a speed limit of 55 miles an hour, that's the limit. If it's 30 miles an hour, it's the limit.
So put a
We
camera
have
out
historically,
and start enforcing it.
we have
Address the
we have
issue.
historically ignored that. And so,
that's
to
fine.
the extent that there are locations where it's suitable, perhaps I don't have an issue doing it, and I know every study that I've seen that deals specifically with the Southern State understands just how dangerous that road is, not only because of how narrow it is, it wasn't meant to handle that many cars, and it does.
At that speed.
And it does at that speed, and it does, it isn't a straight road. So
it's not
there
just a
are
loophole.
reasons why we would do it on the Southern State. There are reasons we would do it in other places, but it would be a good start to start at the Southern State.
So will you support it? Will you support it?
I
Will
would
you move
support
the
it.
legislation forward, not support it like I'm supporting whatever. I mean, move the legislation forward to get it done.
Is
Instead
there
of
a
kicking
bill
the can
out there
down the road.
currently?
I mean, how many people have to die before this is,
Yeah.
we do this?
So let me just start with a couple of points, and I hear you. A couple of things. One, there has to be a bill introduced. We can talk to our counterparts who represent those areas and have that discussion as well. There's a sensitivity that you deal with people in their districts and you build consensus around those things. So I have no issue with it.
It's a state highway.
No, don't get me wrong. I don't have an issue supporting it, but I'll have that
LIE
consensus.
is a federal highway. I don't see how can it be a local issue. It's not. It's a state issue.
Well, the northern state is a state highway.
And
Northern Boulevard is a state thoroughfare.
LIE is a federal
LIE, there are state roads and federal roads. There is a path for it. Certainly on the southern state. I'll say that. And would I support it? Sure. And to your
I
point,
would
it'll
support
save
legislation,
lives.
Ellen.
Push it, not support it, push it.
You're pushing it, Owen.
Yeah, right. No, please, thank you very much.
No, you're
Thank-
welcome. Huh?
Come on up, ladies.
No.
My name is Phyllis Kurland, and I've been living in Flower Hill in Port Washington for over 50 years. The first thing I want to say, Senator Maritns, I had the pleasure of reading your article in the Port Washington News about anti-Semitism just a few hours ago, and thank you very much for that. I really appreciated that. It was very important. Thank you. My question is this. Last year, when George Santos was running for Congress, I was at a debate with him and his opponent, and they discussed abortion. And Santos said, well, in New York State, you know, we have all these laws, we have this, we have that. We don't have to worry about abortion here. You don't have to worry about that, regardless of the result of the election. That was one of the things that he said. So my question is, which I thought then, I think now, suppose that we had a change of power up in Albany and we had a governor who didn't support abortion the way Governor Hochul does, or perhaps a legislature that had changed in terms of who controls the legislature. What would your position be on abortion and abortion availability in New York State?
So one of the things, by the way, full disclosure, I support abortion right, women's right to choose. We, in the legislature, voted both this session and last session to allow the voters of New York to vote on the Equal Rights Amendment, which would enshrine several things, but one of them would be a woman's right to choose into the state constitution. That is coming up for a vote in 2024. So when you talk about what if there's a change in the legislature, what if there's a change in the leadership at the top, the voters have a choice in November next year to make sure that if there is that change of the guard, that some of these things that we hold dear in New York, whether it's abortion rights or right to marry and some of these other issues would be in our state constitution. So that's the way we change our constitution in New York. It goes before multiple sessions. So like, for example, if there was a complete change of the guard in Albany and they try to change all these different laws, they can't change the state constitution without going through more than one legislative session, so another election cycle. So it's not like a fluke where you can change all the laws. So we've gone through 2 election cycles. We voted on it this past year, and then I voted on it previously, and now it goes before the voters in 2024. So to answer your question, we will be able to, in New York, enshrine those rights if the voters so choose in November.
Is that a simple majority vote?
Yes.
Yes.
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, it's a simple majority vote. I supported the legislation as well. I think one of 2 Republicans in the Senate who voted for it. Look, equal rights in the Constitution, I think, are important. That's how you protect basic rights. But I'll be clear, I have opposed late term and partial birth abortions. I voted against abortions beyond the 6 months. I think that there's a line there, but I do believe that not only does every woman have a right to make that choice for themselves, but that that should be enshrined in our state constitution, and I've supported it that way. I have issues with when we take things beyond viability and where we get to points of real concern for me. So I'll draw the line there, but I did support the legislation as well.
Do we have, oh, come on up.
Hi, my name's Linda, and I live here in Port Washington. So this is a topic I know you're both very aware of, but I'm not sure how much the room is. This week, the MTA started with the new schedule for Port Washington, which has been disastrous. And for those that don't know, they removed the Grand Central direct line from Port Washington to Penn Station, which means commuters have to change over at Great Neck. So it's not just affecting our adult commuters to work, it's affecting children that go to school whose parents chose those schools based on this train line. I know for my own family, it's causing my husband, which was just under an hour commute, is now an hour and a half commute each way, which is terrible. It shouldn't be happening. I know, Senator Martin, you're having a meeting coming up, I'm not sure when. I do get your newsletters. I did contact both your offices when this happened. But I want to know what you think is actually going to happen, because this is disastrous for our town. They've basically cut off, they've forgotten about Manhasset, Plandome, and Port Washington for this train line. This week, when people have caught and had to transfer in Great Neck, that train is empty going to Penn Station. So I would like to know what
And there are 2 trains that leave Port Washington
Back to
5
back.
minutes apart going to Penn Station, which is absurd.
Yeah.
So first, shout out to David Seamus and the video. I don't know if everyone saw it. Great job. It really contextualized the issue. To answer your question, I met with the acting president of the railroad today, this afternoon. No promises, because it would be far-fetched for me to get out ahead of this. But let me just say I have a strong inclination that that change is going to be reversed in the short term, and it'll go back to a direct line to Grand Central. Thanks to the efforts of my colleague here in also having reached out to Mr. Free. I know that he mentioned that he had spoken to you, Gina, and that he was aware of the situation. We had a candid conversation, and I think that's going to be the effort. I'm sure we'll hear from him shortly.
Thank you.
When the original schedules, the changes came out, a lot of people didn't really know what was going on or what the changes were going to be. And one of the things I did was go out to the train stations every morning. It was like handing out flyers, letting people know that these changes were happening. And if you have a problem with it, this was when there was the complete elimination of Express to Penn Station. Mary Ann Del Monte, I think she's here. She joined me at the train station. It was like a group effort. We were all at the trains, talking to people, and we're like, listen, you got to put your comments in. You got to tell people how you feel about it. Hundreds of people showed up and said, we want more express trains to Penn Station. So much so that they actually had additional hearings to hear from residents from the port. And it wasn't just Port Washington, Manhasset, Plandome, and Great Neck. So we got, restoration of some of the express trains. It's not as great as it was, but people were making it work, right? They made the switch to Grand Central, and slowly but surely people started using Grand Central more and more. And then as we told people to use Grand Central, it's beautiful, try it, then all of a sudden they're like, oh, just kidding, we're going to take Grand Central away. And all these folks that had kind of changed their lives around this new, beautiful train that billions and billions of dollars went into, the MTA eliminated the direct service. You can still get there, but it's a whole rigmarole to get there. So I also, like Jack, met with the president. We talked about a whole bunch of issues, but obviously my biggest was, the changes to the train. And he said that after the switch this last time on Monday, they got, 400-something complaints. I don't want to say complaints, but complaints from people from the Long Island Railroad. About 80 of them were from around Long Island, and the other 300 and something were from people from the Port Washington line. So, P.S., good for you. What they did ask of us, and I put on social media as well, is to keep it up. Keep putting in those comments. I mean, we've sent them I think Diane, I forgot her last name, Calderon maybe, did a petition, got like 900 signatures. We sent them that. I've sent them all the emails. Mary Ann's been on the phone with them like every other day. We're really nudging and putting pressure. And one thing that we said was this took 8 months to make this change from the February changes to now, that we can't wait that long to make another change. It can't. And the word was immediate. I think I probably used that word many times. Immediate restoration of direct service. Not service, direct service. So I really don't know how much more clearer we could have been. And so they are, again, you know, I hate to say, oh yeah, they heard us loud and clear, but I think it was heard. It was heard. So I'm just we are encouraging everybody to keep up the pressure. We certainly are, as local elected officials. We're not backing down on this. You know, over the past year, I've been like the train lady, and we're just gonna keep it up until we get not only this direct restoration, but down the line, train times that work for this community. Like before we made these changes, the times, just the times of the trains, forget the amount of trains that go into the city, the times are just not working. Big gaps, or the 8:30 that gets you in after 9 o'clock. The actual times themselves are not working, and these are the things that we need to chip away and get service that works for everyone. So that's what we're working on.
Steve?
My name is Steve Kaplan. I'm the Traffic Safety Commissioner for a village in Port Washington. I was formerly on the Traffic Safety Commission for the town of North Hempstead until it got disbanded. But this issue that came up before about the stop sign cameras, I don't know how many people have seen it or seen the studies, but they are so extraordinary that it's crazy. A couple of villages are looking at it. Right now, the question is, well, is it legal? Is it not legal? The New York State says it's not illegal, but it doesn't say it's legal. So there's questions about the enforcement of it. But the studies are incredible, like I said. They've been doing it in one village, and I won't bring it up the name, but one village, Saddle Rock. Okay.
We'll just use the initials, Saddle Rock.
And the studies, I mean, you see the numbers. When they started it, basically, it was about 93% people blew the stop sign before it went out. And then the way they brought it out is they told everybody in the village they're putting these in on a test. And they put signs all over the villages where you enter and where you exit, that the cameras are being enforced for that. After they did it for a couple of months, it's 96% people stop. It's almost like nobody is blowing stop signs. And this was brought about because one of the trustees of the village, his three of his children and his wife stepped off the curb. Well, they didn't have a curb. They didn't have sidewalks there. They stepped into the street, car came, blew the stop sign, and all four of them were hit by the car. Fortunately, they all survived, and they all got better. They're fully recovered. But question I have is, what we need is to have the law passed that say it's legal to do it. I can't see why this would be a question, and I want a commitment from the two of you, because I was told, and it was not official or anything, that the two of you were going to co-sponsor it, and I got all excited. And I'm just asking you to please do that.
Steve, I have the bill. It's already been introduced. It's there in Albany, and to the point we discussed before.
We've talked about it, yeah.
It allows each community themselves to make the decision for their community and decide where they're going to put it. I sponsored the legislation because of the reasons you just mentioned. It works. You know, I often say, people say it's a money grab, that all the community wants is revenue. The reality is they just want people to stop. And if by stopping they don't get a dime, I think they would trade putting those cameras up and eating the costs and not getting any revenue for the fact that they live in a much safer community.
Right.
So, yes, I do support it. The bill is in.
Great.
It was submitted during this last session, and we'll continue to push
Right
it this
at the end,
session.
yeah.
Thank you.
And by the way, you and I have had
Okay.
this conversation about stop signs. You know how I feel about, and I said it before, about people not stopping. One of the concerns that I have is the technology that's available to capture the offenders. Would there be like a video similar to
Yes.
the red light cameras? Where is it on the line? Is it in front of the line and back of the line? And I would like to talk to you about that, if maybe we can, kind of work some of that in. I've literally had these arguments with my staff, and I see Mario has his head down. I love this. I want people to stop at stop signs. I want it to happen. We've just got to figure out a way to make it work. And I'm just, I'm a little concerned about some of the technology that's out there.
And I'm talking
before
deeply with the company.
And you and I have had
And
these
you and I
conversations,
spoke.
yeah.
And I would love to bring you down and let you see what they have.
I would love
mean,
to.
It's just.
Field trip.
And as far as the money, and that's been an argument, oh, they're just doing it for the money. That village and my village that's looking at it is already committed that every penny that we get from that is going to go into traffic safety. We're going to increase the lighting. We're going to increase some of the roads that have to be reconfigured slightly. That money will go to those things, not to anything else, not to, paying this.
I'm pretty sure my bill says exactly that.
Good. I thank you.
It doesn't go into the general fund. It actually goes back towards traffic safety in the community. But
Great.
thanks for that, Steve.
Thank you, thank you.
Hi, I'm Bob Kleinman. I've been in Port Washington for about 40 years. Thank you both for being here. I think this is great. I'm very happy to see when civil servants, including teachers and police, paid fair salaries and benefit packages. But once or twice a year, Newsday does a list of top compensation in the state, and it's always Long Island that tops the list, with people being paid enough unused sick time and unused vacation that their extra payments are more than their salaries. This has been going on for 10 or 20 years. I know part of it is contracts, but there's got to be something the state can do to cut this down. As taxpayers, this just looks horrible. And I'm a liberal, and I'm happy to vote for the school budgets every year, but the optics of this are just terrible, and something's got to be done to cut this down.
And you're right, it is contracts, and a lot of it, those things were negotiated decades ago, and so the people that are retiring now are benefits of those things, from years ago. A lot of the new contracts with CSEA, with teachers, there is a lot less of those kind of incentives. And so I kind of go back and forth, because not for nothing, when I first started, I worked in government my whole life, in various levels of government. I made so little money when I first started, but it's those incentives that get the brain trust. I mean, I'm not saying I'm the brain trust, but get, the people that, we want to attract the talent. And it's hard to attract the talent when the salaries are so low. But you have these other, because we don't pay the same thing as the private sector does. So how do you attract people? You attract people with, with certain pension benefits, with healthcare benefits. A lot of those are not in place anymore. Tier 6 is something that, the unions have been rallying around. There's no more pension packages. It's, 401ks, which is, what a lot of people have. But a lot of the benefits that have been in place years ago are kind of no longer going forward. And there's plus and minus to it. Right? In the end, there's definitely tax savings, but, it's a double-edged sword. You may not get, always get the best and the brightest, because the salaries do start so very low. One thing I don't like is there is sort of some municipalities are starting, we're seeing it in New York City, lawsuits are abound, going back in time and changing benefits back in time. So there is the New York City retirees are dealing with this right now. You have people who were teachers for 50 years, and they're trying to change their health benefits, And, you have people who are in retirement homes and, or in nursing homes. They don't know. All of a sudden, their health insurance is going to be changed and then they get kicked out. Those are the things I don't like. You start with a contract. That's your contract. You move forward. If you want to make changes for the new people coming on, that's one thing. But going back in time is something that's a very slippery slope and gets very dangerous for the people who worked and served for, especially our teachers and such for decades and decades. But going back to those contracts, you're right. It's high. It's very, very high. When I left the county, I did not have that kind of benefits package. I was capped.
Yeah, in the corporate world, if you're able to carry 1 or 2 weeks over, you're very lucky.
Right.
The purpose of vacation time is for people to relax and recharge and come back to work.
Right.
Not to stockpile it, to get a big payout at the end that in some cases boosts your pension on top of it.
Right.
You're right. But to Gina's point, these are compensation packages. And I think it's important that we look at it that way. People get paid in salary, health care benefits, pension benefits, and the like. And that's the deal that was made with that person when they started working, that they would be able to accumulate that. And you're right, it has changed because the newer contracts have removed it. What we're seeing is the legacy of some of the older contracts coming to date. That person earned it. If they had made extra money as opposed to those benefits or was able to bank less vacation time, they would have been paid more. So it's a lump sum. It comes out to a large number at the end, but you have to consider how it was accumulated many times over 20, 30, 40 years or more. And so it's easy in a news story to sensationalize it and point out 10 people who may have worked 50 years of their life without considering how that was accumulated over that period, because it is a big number. But the reality is, that's the deal that was made, and that was the compensation package that that person was entitled to. So I'd rather see less sensationalism around the issue and less clicks and more respect for the fact that the person actually honored their contract, and we're going to honor our contract to them, and understand that those practices have changed over time. So the fact that they had that benefit when they first started working, many of them in the 1980s, 1970s, 1990s, and now retiring today, I'd like to see less sensationalism around it and just an understanding that that was the norm then, this is where we are today, and that those have changed as well. It's their entitlement, that's their compensation package, and I don't think we should begrudge that. It is a big number, but that's what they signed up for, and that's what we agreed to pay them collectively or individually, whether it's a school district, a municipality, or the county when it comes to our police force.
Thank you.
And I think we'll do, because I really worked both of you, we didn't even take a break in the middle, I'm realizing. Do we have 1 or 2 more questions? Before, this gentleman, I know you got one. Is there anyone else who has not asked a question yet? Judy, go for it. Judy, you didn't ask a question yet. Come on up. Rules are rules.
So I'm going to leave my league scarf on because the league actually supports this bill. So this coming session, the New York Health Act has already been introduced, and it will be up for debate. I doubt it will pass this year, but it will be up for debate. I'd like each of our 2 representatives to talk about what they think about how health care currently works in New York. It is getting increasingly broken, getting more and more expensive with more denials, and many of the denials that are going on when they are audited are found to be phony, and they are found to be denials for things that should be covered. And many of the privatized healthcare plans, when audited, are found to be asking for far more in reimbursement than they are legally allowed, to the tune of tens and hundreds of billions of dollars. And New York could preempt that sort of fraud in the private sector and actually cover everybody with comprehensive health care, all comprehensive health care, including dental and eyesight, for less than New Yorkers are currently paying. And numerous studies, including by RAND and other sorts of big deal analyses, have said this. How do you feel about New York Health Act? And if you're in favor of it, why? And if you're against it, explain to me how health care works in New York and why you're in love with it.
Oh, God. So first of all, yeah, no, that's amazing. It's an amazing question. I am so privileged to have NYSHIP, which is the New York State Employees Health Insurance. My entire, adult life, and it's certainly now, I am incredibly lucky, and not a lot of people are. I am a co-sponsor of the New York Health Act. However, it is something that I believe in universal health care. I think that people shouldn't be going broke if they get cancer. People shouldn't be doing GoFundMes. And doctors shouldn't be fighting with health insurance companies for routine procedures that they believe is important for the patient. Health insurances are not doctors. That being said, it shouldn't, I personally believe, I sponsor it because I want there to be a conversation around healthcare. And it is getting more and more expensive in New York, Medicaid reimbursements and the like. I would love our federal government to deal with this. I believe it's a federal issue. I think it should stay a federal issue, and I would love our federal partners to work on it. New York doing it alone I believe, will create like a second economy in New York, and it would cost us billions and trillions of dollars, which we obviously don't have. But how are we dealing with the least among us says a lot about who we are as people, and New York is trying to do our best to take care of the least among us, but we're certainly not doing enough. That's how I feel in general about healthcare, and specifically, you're right. New York Health Act is I think a conversation starter. The unions obviously are, incredibly opposed because they've negotiated. So like the 1199s of the world, and but they negotiated these incredible packages for us that the gentleman was talking about. So that's to answer your question, Judy, that's where I stand on it.
Yeah, I'm not a sponsor of the bill. I have some real reservations about what that means for us as New Yorkers. I think we have to be very thoughtful when we decide to make these kinds of changes. And frankly, I've heard all kinds of numbers associated with savings that we're going to get by trusting government to run things more efficiently than the private sector. So I'm a natural skeptic. Maybe I'm a bit more cynical than other people, but I don't believe that anything that the government has ever done has been done more cheaply, more efficiently, with more accountability. That's my sense of it. I'm not going to.
Medicare?
I'm not going to debate the issue.
No, but around the whole privatization issue?
Judy, I'll get to Medicare as well.
Okay.
But that's my concern when it comes to the New York Health Act and efforts to have health care for all under one umbrella. I do believe that we are a generous state. If you look at how much we spend in safety net programs in this state, in Medicaid in this state, I don't think by any metric anyone can tell us that we're not spending enough. And I don't know how much enough would be, but to the tune of, I think this past year, $67 or so billion that we spent on Medicaid. And I won't contextualize that for what it means in places like California or Texas, who are larger states than we are, and how much more we spend per capita on these issues. But I do think that we have a system that needs to be looked at comprehensively. It could be fixed, made more fair. Maybe we need to reallocate resources in different ways. But the idea of tearing up the entire system and entrusting it to state is a concern I would have. And to answer your question about Medicare, Medicare has worked for the entire country. It is a federal system. There's a reason that it's been applied that way. And I think that, it could serve as a model for the federal government to do it, but I don't know why we in New York would want to have a system that would effectively make us the healthcare providers for anyone who could make their way to New York. I don't know that that's fair on New York taxpayers either.
Okay.
We're going to leave.
I won't take a second bite of the apple, but I will continue this conversation.
Oh, I count on you calling.
Judy's a good advocate. Judy's a good advocate.
I don't know Judy to be shy.
And I think this will be our last question for our lucky gentleman that gets 2 questions.
Apologies, I forgot to introduce myself before. I'm Mark Mogul. I'm in Port Washington. You spoke before about water. In Nassau County, I think we have about 43 different water districts. Each with many of each have their own archaic billing system. You can't even pay electronically on most of those systems. Who is in charge that can look at across the board and say maybe there's common
Gina is.
and there's some common things that could be done where they have common administrative functions that might be able to be streamlined and everybody would save some money?
Sir, that's a great question, and thank you for that. The reality is, if we look to our neighbor immediately to the east, the Suffolk County Water Authority actually does a pretty good job in providing water, in marshaling resources, and focusing those resources. What I have found over the years that everyone believes that consolidation is a great idea, but they want their community to be left alone. Right. So their local water district, or local village water department, or local water authority is great, but everyone else is wasteful. I do think we should and we have had these conversations. At some point, there's going to have to be a consolidation of resources. Just the treatment alone for the different contaminants that are being listed these days is putting an extraordinary effort on each water district to have to come up with different means and replicating them across the board. So you have districts geographically small, side by side, that are replicating the same treatment efforts that could be used on a larger scale, but are being replicated at a cost, at an astronomical cost, that frankly probably isn't sustainable. And I think that's going to force districts to begin to work together in sharing treatment alternatives in order to begin to consolidate that. Because it is going to be extraordinarily expensive, and we're not going to be able to sustain the kinds of investments that are going to be necessary on a district-by-district basis. I think by necessity, they're going to have to consolidate, and we'll eventually get to a point where we perhaps look more like our neighbor to the east than what we have here in Nassau County.
That's interesting, because I was thinking that maybe there were unique local issues where they had to have some expertise in each one of those areas, but there's common back office issues that could be shared. But what you're saying is actually there's some of the technical issues can also be shared as well.
That's my sense. And these water districts or water departments in many of our villages, they grew organically. And so they're unique to that local community. In many instances, they were there before the formal government was, because they were providing water for the local community, and they grew in different areas, and so they exist. To ask them to cease existing and consolidate sometimes can be traumatic, but I do think that we're entering a period where the sheer cost of treatment is going to require some coordination.
But who's going to be the instigator or put the pressure on these independent entities to look at consolidation?
They're government entities. They're all government entities for the most part. There are a couple of private actors out there as well.
But if I go to the town of North Hempstead, they point me to the water district. The water district points me, every other.
The water district itself is a government entity.
Right.
A village water department is a faction of that village. Asking that village and that community to give up their water department that they feel that they invested in the infrastructure, they paid for those wells, they paid for all of the infrastructure improvements, and they're going to give it away. Well, the reality is It belongs to everyone. Whether the person has lived in the village for 30 years or whether they moved in a day ago, that infrastructure already exists, and we have to start thinking about it that way, my view.
But is that going to be, then is the impetus going to come out of the governor's office to make this happen? I just can't see it, nothing will happen.
Sir, I don't think it's going to be forced. I think they're going to have to begin consolidating, because I don't think there's going to be the ability of a state entity or the governor or even the legislature to say, you have to do this, because there are property rights in that infrastructure. There's an investment that they made in there. They're entitled to be compensated if it's forced. And so I do think it's more likely to happen organically than someone saying, you have to consolidate with your neighbor. A couple of years back, there was an effort to try and get rid of villages. Do you remember that? Consolidation. A former governor, about 15 years ago, and he said the villages, we had too many layers of government and our villages are too redundant. We should get rid of them altogether, and they're going to incentivize that. There was tremendous pushback. So I do think that there is movement in that direction. It's likely to happen on its own, but if it's forced from above, I think the pushback will be significant.
Okay, thank you.
Well, so I would like to thank, I would hope everyone would give a great round of applause and thanks to our wonderful elected officials. They serve you, they serve us well. We thank you so much for coming tonight, for putting up with all of our questions for 2 hours. I didn't even give you a break. And thank you so much to the audience too. You know, sometimes these things can be very difficult, but I love when we're able to come together and really talk about issues. You see our electeds are really excited and energized about engaging on topics, and I think that's the best way for government to work.
I think we should do this again.
Anytime.
Right? I think we should do it again. Maybe after the budget or something.
Oh, yeah.
We'll have a lot
But before
to talk
the big
about
ugly.
Yeah, we will. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
So let's shoot for, sometime late April, beginning of May.
Yeah. And I'll have a little, hopefully a little bambino.
Keep your fingers crossed. It's not gonna be all
Oh, God.
We're all
We'll
hoping.
see. Your mouth to God's ears, Jack. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving.